our next conversation is going to be around e-scooters and transportation. We saw some scooters pop up a few years ago. There was a lot of, positive energy around it, some negative energy. There was a lot of theft even, and lots going on. Now Spin has come in and is working with the city of Providence to develop a really robust and successful e-scooter program. So really kind of trying to connect people in that last mile of transit as well, and also rethink how we're using our streets. So really excited to have Ashley Brown here from Spin, Jakob Frenette from the city of Providence, and also I believe we're joined by the CEO of the city of Providence, Sabrina Solares. So thank you all for being here, and you can unmute yourselves.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah,
yes, thank you for having us.
So Ashley, do you want to, you want to get this started with how you and Spin have kind of been able to forge this kind of public-private partnership?
Yeah, well, actually, it really started with the city. The city of Providence issued an application, a request for proposals, and at the time, Spin, we were, I want to say, probably not the first or the second company in many cities that started with e-scooter programs. We kind of came on the scene in many cities' second and third year program offerings, and so that was the case for the city of Providence. So we responded to a competitive proposal that the city issued that included a list of different requirements, thinking about equity, how we would deliver equitable services to the city, how we would distribute our devices, hiring practices, all of those things. And so we, among other vendors, responded to that, and the city chose us as one of two proposals to move forward.
Awesome. And Jakob, can you just introduce yourselves and yourself and share a little bit about your involvement in the scooter project?
Yeah, so my name is Jakob Frenette. I'm the Deputy Chief Operating Officer, so I work closely with Sabrina. And on scooters, we work very closely with Ashley. I guess to start, scooters first showed up to our city in 2018, I believe, August 2018. And that's exactly what happened. Scooters just showed up on our streets. We had the foresight to see that they weren't going anywhere, so we created this pilot program to regulate them in some way. And we had two companies at the time, Bird and Lime, and now we have Spin and VO. And I think one of the big things going into that second year was we knew we wanted scooters. We learned a lot, but we were also looking for more than just scooters within the footprint of Providence. Similar to what Ashley had mentioned, things like equity, community engagement, like what was that extra piece to benefit our community members?
I'll also add on to that, for the city, it was also deeply important to us that we had partners and participants in our second pilot year that were also sharing the vision for this broader strategy around connectivity. Piggybacking a little bit off of the last conversation that you had about multiple options for transportation and really having more of a strategic, broader plan, it was a large part of how we evaluated the applicants to the second year of the pilot program once we had lived the first year and really learned some initial lessons about what was a very new type of technology visiting our cities. And so Spin has been nothing but an amazing partner to us as we've had, to Ashley's point, deep conversations about what it means to provide transportation equitably at pieces of that nature.
Yeah, let's kind of focus a little bit about this kind of, I mean, it's such a new idea to have scooters, electric scooters in our city, and to think of that as like a legitimate mode of transportation. So let's take a step back and say a little bit more on what happened when you had the birds come up. What were the issues, and also what were the learnings that we saw were positive that we could then implement? Like why focus on this rather than what we don't have in the city right now is like a bike share program, right?
Right, right. So I can take that a little bit. And when they, anytime we run a program like this, I think it is deeply important to the city that we spend a great deal of time on education and on our constituency understanding what the intent of this is and how this can benefit the broader community. With our bike share, when Jump had initially started with the city, we spent a great deal of time doing that. But with the way that scooters initially came into the city, we weren't provided with that same opportunity. So we actually, for a small period of time, asked Bird, who had come to the city, to remove their scooters from it, because we needed to do some diligence, quick diligence, but we needed to do some. And then put together a regulation and say that, you know, we're willing to work this out. We see how transportation is evolving very quickly, but we need your partnership and understanding that we need to communicate with our community and really make sure that this is done the right way, that we're listening to our businesses who are saying, why are these in front of my business? That we're listening to neighborhoods. As it developed, we very quickly figured out the demographic for e-bikes was different from the demographic for e-scooters. And so it was clear that these could live together in our city, which is why we're in pilot year 2.
Fantastic. And so can we talk a little bit more this demographic and how we're able to hone in on that, how we're able to provide these transit options for maybe high school students, you know, middle school students, people, maybe lower income populations?
Sure. Jake, do you want to take that a bit? I know you've been working on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ashley, I would invite you to jump in at any time here, because I know a lot of the demographic info lives with Spin. But I think we found that there's been a wide variety in the demographic usage, mostly in the college student area, but especially in this post-COVID world, it's kind of exploded because it is a socially distanced type of transportation. I know, Ashley, we've had a couple conversations about that, if you want to jump in there.
Yes, no, Spin Services, we are really excited to be able to bring our service to many communities. Right now, our service is restricted right now to 18 plus, and the main reason around that is because our users are required to sign waivers and things like that. And so that's where our service is at this moment. But as we continue to evolve, especially in this new normal with COVID-19, we're starting to explore other service models, and we're starting to explore what different device offerings might provide. And so I wouldn't be surprised if in future iterations of our program offerings would include passes, would include different device types, would include hopefully getting to a point that we can provide our service to a wider audience as well, especially since we have found great success in serving university campuses. And so how can we reach a smaller demographic but do so safely? That's among the things that we are continuing to explore.
And actually, you brought up something that I'm curious about. I don't know if it's being talked about on the city level or maybe the state or in the RIPTA level. You know, universities oftentimes give a free pass to public transit to students. Are there active conversations about integrating that with something like a Spin scooter, or creating some kind of incentive program for certain populations?
Yes, absolutely. We are in the process of trying to figure out how we integrate things like that. We're also looking at trying to integrate ways that some employers have benefits and benefits that attach to transit passes as well. So we're trying to figure out how our service can be seen as, in the same boat as transit passes as well. And I think that is an attractive feature for university campuses that we are also exploring. And I think this sort of frame in time has really challenged us as industry to how we can meet the needs of people where they are right now, whether you are working remotely, whether you are working in person or going to school in person. And so these are among the things that we are actively exploring right now.
And Jacob or Sabrina, can you talk to that a little bit? Is there some work?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that. in addition to those, I will also commend Spin on their Spin Access program, which is specifically for people of lower incomes, and especially with so many people either out of work partially or fully right now. That has been a great option for people that maybe aren't getting it through their employer, but still want that last mile transportation. And I think that's been a huge offering for the citizens of Providence.
Cool.
Yeah, Avi, and I just want to add too, one of the things that we are really hoping to expand on is the collaborative that we have with Pittsburgh. You know, we won a permit last year with the city of Pittsburgh that is in partnership with the city, that's in partnership with Zipcar, Numo, Waze, Swift Mile, transit apps, so that we can offer a portfolio of mobility options, or what people know as mobility as a service, so that, kind of similar to the last conversation, that people have sort of a one-stop shop where they can have everything available to them all in one app. And so that is something that we hope to expand in other places. And so we are looking at different ways that we can be innovative in working in partnership with many stakeholders at the same time.
Cool. If you have time, I hope that you'll be able to stick on in about half an hour, when there's a startup in Providence who's trying to build a kind of a bike-centric Waze type app, but hopefully it can grow to something larger and more encompassing. I was thinking that in this kind of the next kind of few minutes before we'll try to finish up having some time for Q&A. So if you have questions, throw them in the chat, and we'll get to them in the last kind of few minutes. Curious to talk a little bit about street and accessibility. We heard a lot previously, and I think one of the biggest things with scooters is that it's not really a car, it's not really a bike, and it's not really a person, and we haven't really, qualified where they should belong. And it seems like we struggle with that, and how we're thinking about reshaping our streets or our sidewalks to accommodate these kinds of transit.
Yeah, so I can speak to that a bit. So if I imagine it's probably come up in some of your earlier conversations today in the full day, that the city has its Great Streets initiative. So I think as far as our investments in the city, we recognize that our infrastructure also has to follow this movement. We can't simply say we encourage the use of bikes, we encourage the use of scooters in the city of Providence, but not actually have the infrastructure there to support it. I saw at the end of the last session, there were a lot of questions about one-way streets and so how we're making those decisions. So this plan seeks to marry the best practices that come from various cities and towns and countries apart from ours that have really transformed their infrastructure to support that. So with our administration, with Mayor Elorza, we also implemented a cyclical capital improvement plan. So what that does is that means every single year when we submit our budget, we update our capital improvement cyclical plan. And that includes traffic calming, that includes bike lanes, and how we may change a street from a one-way to a two-way, or switch from having parking on a particular street to having a bike lane. You guys probably have seen that in front of the newly renovated library just outside of downtown Providence. There is now a bike lane that goes past that. Those are things that are the result of the Great Streets Plan and the Capital Improvement Plan. And to the end of the app that you're speaking of that you're going to have next, we're in active conversations with our partners in this realm, such as RIDA, to say, how do we coordinate all of this? The goal at the end of the day is for convenience and broader connectivity of all of these strategies, so that people can very organically say, maybe I take a bus into the city, and then I hop on a scooter, and then I hop on a bike, and a car is not required to enjoy the city of Providence. So the mayor has encouraged us to, as we are working towards investing in our city and really rebuilding it, that we're investing in a city that is made for people and not primarily for cars.
Ashley, do you have any thoughts on how this is being done in other cities throughout the country?
Yeah, other cities are very much in lockstep with the city of Providence. I think typically what we're seeing is that the scooters come and then the infrastructure comes. And so I think as people are, or what we're seeing now, especially during COVID, is that people are more adventurous now. Maybe if they didn't hop on a scooter before, that they're much more willing to sort of try their bike share or their scooter share for the very first time. And so I think what it has is that it's really created an opportunity for people to experience their streets in a very different way that is not in a car. And so it has accelerated conversations among city officials and city planners that how can we take this time, especially with a little less cars on the road, to expand and capitalize on this moment to bring safe street infrastructure. Because from, as a service provider, if people feel safe in the streets, they're more likely to use micromobility services. And so I think the more that we can provide and encourage and not just work with industry, but also work with community advocates, I think that there's a real, we're sort of in this golden opportunity to take advantage of this time. And so that's just a little bit about what we're seeing in other cities, but very much aligned with the city of Providence.
Yeah, and I feel like it just takes, it's taken just years for people just to get comfortable with things. As we talk about bike lanes too, people, there's this fear almost of what it might do to someone's traffic in their neighborhood street, which I think is personally a little absurd, knowing what the traffic patterns already are. One other, I've been thinking about Spin specifically, and Spin is, if I'm correct, it's actually owned by Ford, right? So could we talk a little bit about how one of the largest car manufacturers, who you would think only cares about streets and probably only cares about, what is their most popular car, the F-150, which is now a 4-door massive monster, that they're getting into automated cars, they're getting into technology, they're getting into scooters. Can you talk a little bit more about that strategy, and also that it's coming from a kind of a place of community development in some ways?
Yeah, I think it speaks to sort of this whole arm. Ford has a whole mobility arm now that really is looking at how can we take our sort of 100+ years of experience in the car industry and bring that into sort of this emerging space, and kind of taking the two worlds and kind of putting them together and in a way that allows not just the car industry to look at the ways that they can have an influence and impact on this emerging space, but also how can we think beyond sort of what we know transportation to be sort of in the car space. And so one of the things that Ford has really pressed upon us is how can we be a long-term partner? That's when we talk to cities, we talk to them with the idea that we want to be here and support your work from a long-term perspective. And so sometimes that looks like the really slow and very thoughtful, work on regulations, to kind of work on regulations that make sense for the devices in this sort of space and time. And sometimes we're not always going to be the active operator on the ground right away. We've, in many cases, has not been the active operator, but we've been helping to help at least cultivate sensible, strong, and responsible regulations with cities. And then, once a program gets to a place that we think that it's going to be a strong opportunity for us to operate, and where we think we can add value, that's when we apply for those programs. And so for us, we just see ourselves as a partner, as a thought partner, especially in helping to bring sensible regulations and policies to the forefront. And I think that is sort of the foundation of how Ford wants us to, interact with cities, and, why we never launch without permission, that we always want to, have the proper authorization and kind of that strong relationship with cities.
So my last question before we get into a couple questions of Q&A, I'm kind of thinking like, where are we going to be in 5 years, and where does, you know, where does Spin want to be? Also, where does the city of Providence want to be? And I'm framing it with the idea, with this kind of conversation. Are scooters going to be another bike, or are we going to be, are we thinking about this is just another method of transit, and hopefully we can build our streets for many other systems? Or maybe there's going to, or is there something else that's going to come up, you know, the little unicycle Segway thing that I see around sometimes. Anyways, maybe we'll start with Sabrina and Jakob from the city.
Sure. I will say, and then I'll let Jake add on too, but that we would not be making multi-million-dollar investments in our streets if we weren't committed to this staying. So I think as far as, you know, where does the city see this going? I see scooters and bikes and unicycles, whatever they may be, in the city for the foreseeable future. And I welcome that. I think we're excited for that. And the industry has evolved so fast. I think it would be silly of me not to anticipate that there's going to be some evolution to how the devices look, to how they work, or whatever it is. Right now, Ashley spoke to collaboration on regulations, things of that nature. One of the things we've been discussing amongst our teams is that cargo bikes are now a thing. Bikes that now speak to accessibility for parties who have limited mobility or have ADA concerns, that's now a thing, which I think 2-3 years ago even that was not a primary thing. So as we talk about our regulations and how we do them, we want to make sure that we're enabling all of the legalese and the bureaucracy to be able to allow for the creativity there to expand upon the pool of people who are able to enjoy and utilize these forms of transportation. And again, I think that just speaks to the fact that we're really looking at this as the long haul, that this is going to be part of Providence for as long as you can imagine it.
Awesome. And I really appreciate you bringing in the accessibility component and how we're going to be diving into new technologies around more accessible modes of transit for people with disabilities.
Okay. Did I miss anything, Jake?
No, I was just going to say that I think a lot of the uncertainty on scooters is they just started appearing 2 years ago and they've become so popular so fast. So I feel like a lot of people are waiting for the other shoe to drop. But to Sabrina's point, I think the amount of investment and really planning that we're doing here is to make this a long-standing program in the city.
Thank you. And Ashley, where is Spin evolving to in 5 years? Give us some secrets.
Well, what I can tell you is this: I can speak more broadly for the industry. I think we're starting to see other countries open up, which I think is very exciting. The UK just accelerated their trials, which they were not anticipating for another year or so, but I think COVID has provided that opportunity that, hey, we need to find another way to move people around if mass transit might not be the most ideal. And so I think new countries that we weren't anticipating coming online are now fast tracking their trials and their pilots. And I do think in terms of where we see sort of the waves of e-scooter programs in the US, you know, cities like Providence and others that are on year 2 headed into year 3 of experience, what we're seeing is just different program formats, you know, strong, you know, multimodal preferences. And so I do see that the industry will have to respond to cities that want more than one device type, that want an accessibility device type. And also too, the other thing that's very interesting about the Northeast, specifically Providence right now, I think now most recently the city of Yonkers, is the only programs in the Northeast. And so I think there are just some other cities, thinking of Boston, thinking of New York City, thinking of Philadelphia, that will still have to have a year 1 with these programs. And so in many ways, some cities will be a little bit further ahead in the next 5 years, and then others will just kind of be catching up a little bit, and we'll have to learn, you know, have the ability to learn from cities like Providence how to structure their programs.
Cool. Well, thank you so much. We just have a couple minutes left. I want to throw it out there for questions. You feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question. I'll quickly point out something Liza just said. which I really appreciate, and something I never actually quite recognized, that, you know, the term now is urban trails, and we're building urban trails rather than just bike lanes, and that they can be wider and more accessible. So great point there. Something slightly off topic, I did hear, unless there's another question, someone, was there a question about why we don't have the bike system anymore? Obviously there was some theft and vandalism. Are there plans to bring something like that back that's more sustainable?
Sure, I could take that. Looking back at everything we've said here, I think it's clear that we're committed. We're committed to there being bikes in the city of Providence. And unfortunately, as we saw COVID impacted so many other organizations, and we're seeing some of our businesses really struggle in this time, we saw that they made the difficult decision with Jump and their parent companies, et cetera, to go through a switch and an acquisition. And in that analysis of how they went through that decision making, they decided that the best thing for them in that moment was to step away from our particular market. And we were sad to see that go. That said, I'm looking forward to bikes returning back to the city. I don't have a particular date yet to share with anybody here, but I will say that the city is actively working on options and looking forward to bringing back some sort of a bike share option for our constituents. I think we've seen loud and clear that these tools are things that our constituents would like to see. And more often than not, the question is, when are they coming back, not if. So I think, again, this has become an organic part of our culture. So I think we owe it to bring them back.
Yes, and especially because, I mean, the demand is through the roof, and even used bikes are now inaccessible these days.
Yes.
Well, I really appreciate the three of you for joining us today. Really great to hear what's going on and how you are both collaborating. So thank you so much, Sabrina, Jacob, and Ashley. Really appreciate you taking the time today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.